Thank you for taking a Sunday off to be here with us, all right? So the objectives for this session, bear in mind that this is a very short session and we cannot cover all of the assessment in 90 minutes, but I'll do my best. So we're going to try to understand and explore assessment in Language B. We're going to explore ways to integrate Language B assessment into learning experiences in the classroom. So I'm going to share a couple of tips. And we're going to discuss ways to carry out assessment moderation and IA feedback in Language B. That's the part that you will be working on. So this is going to be more you working than me talking, I hope, towards the end. So first of all, I would like to start, and I would like you to take 2 minutes. Sarah will share a link on the chat, and I would like you to add 1 or 2 questions to this Padlet of issues or questions that you have in relation to Language B assessment. Okay, let's take 2 minutes. I'm going to be brutal with time because we are running, already running late. If you just click on the plus symbol there, you can start adding your questions. Hopefully you can answer to other people's questions too. So we have a couple of questions already. We have 20 seconds to go. More confident in speaking, questions about longer texts when it comes to writing, how many summative assessments, resources to help teaching text types. Okay, that's time for us. So we have a couple of questions there. Well, now we have many, and we'll go back to them at the end of the session. Please feel free, that Padlet will be open for the whole of the session and later. So feel free to come back and give your advice to people and answer back to those questions. I'll do my best to answer them while you are working too, or come back to try to answer those. Let's see if we are able to answer those questions with the presentation that we are doing today. So our agenda, we are going to go through philosophy, language assessment overview, external assessment, internal assessment, and moderation. Okay, so let's start. This is taken from the Language B guide, and I wanted to take a couple of minutes to read through this and use the chat to share a word, a phrase, and a sentence that resonates with you when it comes to the Language B course. Okay, so read and share a word, a phrase, and a sentence that you think it's important for Language B.
All right, we have some input in the chat box. Word is communicate.
Yes. Communicate, that's good. That's central to language B. Yes.
A phrase, conceptual understanding.
Conceptual understanding is of
another word, communicate, oral skills, sharing, a range of contexts and purposes, acquire global knowledge.
Yeah, so as you see, I mean, I highlighted some of those here. So we need to bring all of this together when we do assessments. So communication is of paramount importance. Conceptual understanding is coming to the forefront in DP subjects as well. We have to be able to prepare them in a range of skills, including interactive skills, but we should not forget about international mindedness and global significance.
Yes, no they're mentioned actually, Mariana, in the chat box. Target language, international mindedness, key aim, message to develop international mindedness, again, language and culture. So these have been mentioned in the chat box.
Cool, thank you. So you know what's important for our course and then for our assessment. And this is great. At no point do we see grammar or structures or rote learning, okay? So let's bear this in mind when we move forward, okay? So let's have a look at the assessment philosophy and principles of assessment philosophy by DIB. It is an integral part of teaching and learning. It helps us monitor student progress. It helps us understand what students have learned. It should be ongoing, varied, and integral to the curriculum. Somebody asked in the Padlet, how often should I give summative assessments? I would say summative, formative, for learning, as learning, external and internal, all of the time. You are constantly assessing your students' performance and where they are, because assessment is ultimately going to help you plan your course and your learning engagement. Students benefit also from these assessments and for reflecting in your feedback. So today we're going to see how to give feedback to students in order to benefit and learn from it, okay? So moving forward, I want you to think a little bit again about your course design. So I'm going to ask the Toddle team to please put the poll in place, and let's try to reflect on your course design and to what extent you do these things. Do we have any results yet? Okay, so I'm not sure if everybody can see it, but we have, to a great extent and to a lesser extent, to a great extent, in most of the questions, which is great because you are complying with all of the needs of course design. So hopefully this helped you reflect on the things that need to be in place in relation to course design and assessment. We have another one that has to do with the use of rubrics. How often do you use assessment rubrics in the classroom? Let's see what audience we have here. Okay, that's great. At least we didn't get any never, and we have always and a lot of sometimes. Hopefully after today's session, you use rubrics all of the time when you are doing exercises similar to the ones of the of the language B assessment. So let's go to our language B assessment overview. We know that it is divided between internal and external, that it's a 75-25% difference. In the past, internal assessment was only 20%, and now it's gaining more prominence. And we now have the listening component that we will be assessed for the first time this May 2022. Okay, so without further ado, let's bear in mind the assessment objectives that we need to think about when we develop the assessment components and the learning strategies. I am making a huge emphasis on assessment objectives because we should be planning our courses and our assessments with a backward design in mind. So we think and we start from the aims and objectives. What is it that we want students to do and be able to do? We develop our assessments from that. And because we know what is it that we are going to assess them on, we can then design our learning experiences. In addition to that, in the language B course, we need to think about TOK, we need to think about ATLs, we need to think about CAS, and we need to think about international mindedness, as you spotted at the beginning. So it's not an easy task, okay? So let's move forward. Because I think aims and objectives are super important, I would like you to work a little bit more and go to this new Padlet and try to think about how is it that you meet these aims and objectives with the activities that you deal with in class, and which internal or external assessment is related to each of these aims and objectives. Just pick one and answer one. Don't try to go to all of them. These will be open for the rest of the day and for the rest of the week, so you can go back to it and download it. So Sarah, can you please share that link in the chat so that people can access? Let's take 2 minutes. Don't spend too much time. Pick one and you go to add comment and you can add your answer there. Okay, I'm looking at the answers here, and you are able to decide which internal or external assessment is associated with it. Try to also give me a couple of examples of class activities that we can use to meet these aims and objectives. I have to be honest, before I became a workshop leader, I was not so focused on aims and objectives. But after reading a lot and really analyzing the language guide, it makes the creation of learning experiences much easier when you start from the end as backwards planning. Okay, so novels, paper one, excellent. I'm not going to share that in the screen because you can see it as you are, time's up. As you are completing that. So I'm going to move forward. Thank you for your participation. Oops. I said I'm not going to share it and I'm sharing it. That's great. So let's go to a little bit of external assessment guidance. There is another Padlet that we have created that contains tons of resources for paper one, paper two, listening, individual orals, and you can also find a link to these two Padlets. So I am not sure, and depending on the time, we're going to open it up to you to add more resources and ideas. But if we don't do it during this session, by all means, go in and share what you have, because this is probably what we get most out of these workshops. It's learning from one another and learning what things people are doing back at their schools, okay? So from now on, everything we do will be sharing this new Padlet, okay? And Sarah will share it when I ask you to do stuff in it, okay? So when we move on to external assessment, it's 75%. We have paper 1 writing and paper 2 listening and reading. Listening being new this time, this upcoming assessment session. So let's go to writing. Writing is probably the one that in which included more questions over there. And I think that those questions came with HL, because for HL students, they need to write a lot of words. It is true that if they are taking English BHL and they are not taking all of the other subjects in English, can be difficult. What I found is if they take English BHL and a group 3 subject in English, or if they write the extended essay in English, that's not such a big problem for the word count. But that's just my observation, okay? So it's based on the 5 themes. You have 3 situations and 3 different text types. And what do we assess? We assess language, we assess message, and we assess conceptual understanding, which is the new feature with the new language guide. So there we have to bear in mind audience, purpose, meaning, context, and variation, okay? So we need to be aware of that, and we need to incorporate that in our classes and our learning experiences. So I'm going to share a couple, like very briefly, a couple of things that we use at school. So we have the task, and there's one more thing, sorry, before we go to the sharing, that you need to bear in mind. You have a task where they tell you what the purpose, the context, and the audience is, and you need to train students to read that very carefully. But then you have 3 options, and those 3 options are not all correct. So we need to teach our students to decide which is the appropriate text type, because you also have a generally appropriate text type and you have an inappropriate text type. So these discussions, and starting from this discussion, it's probably the best strategy that you can use to prepare those students, okay? If it is generally appropriate, why? I mean, does that text type help me meet the purpose? Is it or the context, or is it directed at that audience, okay? Because conceptual understanding is going to lose points if they use or choose an inappropriate text type, okay? So this is something that we do with our students. Every time we expose them to a text type, here you can add as many text types as you want. This is in the Padlet that I talked about before. So we, whether it is in a writing activity or if it is a reading activity, we raise awareness of the different features of the text type. So they have to come here and write, what about the register? What about the audience? What about the tone? What about the structure? How many paragraphs? What do you do in each of those paragraphs or sections? What are the key traits of that text type? What are the words or key phrases and expressions that you are going to include in the introduction, in the body, in the conclusion? What's the formulaic language that you can give them, or that they can notice or be aware of, to then make their writing of this text type more automatic and gain points in language, but also in conceptual understanding, okay? So that's something that you can use with your students. So some things to bear in mind: expose students to good examples, just give them input before output. Practice all text types. In the last subject report, they noticed that news articles and guidelines were not very much, let's say, were not very well tackled by students. So that's something that we should bear in mind. Analyze examples with them. Raise awareness of the text type features. Talk about the language, talk about the message, talk about conceptual understanding. Use this table that I have just shared to record those observations. Try to integrate skills, exploit the reading texts from a writing perspective as well, and not just from meaning. and expose students to past papers or create paper one tasks discussing the suitability of one text type over another, okay? It's practice, 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 and also feedback, okay? Text type, audience, and purpose. For conceptual understanding, this is something that we add to every single paper one that we create the first year and sometimes into the second year of the course. We add this table and we make them think about the purpose, the audience, the text type, the tone, the register. And this helps them read the prompt carefully and also choose the most appropriate text type. Make it explicit. This is too abstract for some students, so you need to make it explicit. This scaffolding that you put in the tasks that you assign students really helps them plan the text type effectively. This is another part, and it is intrinsically related to assessment. This is a table for reflection. Here you're also developing approaches to teaching and learning self-management. They record all of the text types that they have written, the topics, the marks that have been awarded, and then a personal reflection on their performance. Now, we normally give back papers to students and they see the grade, boom, they put it away. No, take the time to reflect on their performance, take the time to reflect on what they did well, take the time to reflect on what they need to work on, okay? And how to be prepared the next time. So, and this is a good document for you to see if the student is getting your feedback or not, okay? Peer feedback is also good, but my advice, if you do peer feedback, make sure you use protocols. And here I'm sharing, and it's also in the Padlet, the letter of feedback by Harvard Project Zero. You can just print it and give it to different students. So you make sure that they go from the bottom to the top. So they ask questions for clarifications, they express what they like, and they focus on the positive. They state concerns. I wonder if, it seems to me that, and then add suggestions. This is good, not only because it also helps develop their language, because here they're using good expressions to express feelings, to value, and to state concerns, but also because they learn from the mistakes of others. Okay, so that's also a good resource when giving feedback. All right, so let's see how we are doing in time. Can we take 2 minutes? Sarah, are we more or less okay in time for people to jump in and just add a couple of ideas to paper one?
Yes, we do have time.
Okay, so let's take 2 minutes. If Sarah can share the link to this Padlet, and if you go to the first column, which is paper one, you will find all of these resources that I talked about, but I would really like you to share a resource that you think works, or just ideas. So you hit on the plus button at the bottom of the column, and you can add something that you would really like to share with colleagues that works for you, okay? 2 minutes. Somebody asked for writing resources, and I added a writing resource, which is really old. And if one of my teachers from university that I think it's here remembers that book, she's going to laugh, because we use that also at university. But it has really good examples of written, of text types. So if you, I added the link to the publishers. It's not very student friendly, but you can get really good examples there. Writing plan mapping, yes, planning and mapping is great. Planning is really important, especially when they have to write so many words. Yes, somebody shared here, use vocabulary and idiomatic expressions. Yes, and that's why that first table helps a lot, because you talk about it, you raise awareness about the idiomatic expressions or the expressions that you are susceptible to find in a specific text type. And that's good for them to have them all together for studying, and even a scaffolding for when they have to write that text type. You can even let them use that when you assess them during the first year. Okay, 1 minute to go, 40 seconds. Analysis of an exemplar answer, form, structure, vocabulary. Yes, yes. You can even have like a set of questions that you always ask whenever you find, you find a text type, or even if it is for reading purposes, as I said before. Quizlet for vocabulary and idiomatic expressions. Yes. Excellent. Okay, let's continue. Time's up. There we go. Let's move on to paper 2, listening and reading. I want you to focus on this. This is taken from the Language B guide. It's one of the course principles of course designs. Principles of course designs talk about integration and variety. And one of the points says that we need to help students develop strategies for dealing with unfamiliar situations and unfamiliar language. And to achieve this, we need to expose them to authentic materials or modified authentic materials. I'm more for authentic, that have originally been produced for everyday users of the target language. And this is very important for listening and reading. So please do bear this in mind. As probably you won't find paper 1 samples unless you purchase past papers, you can design your own. But on designing your own, bear in mind the task types that students are going to be exposed to. Every time you get a piece of authentic materials that you like and it's connected to the themes that you are developing at that point in the lesson, make sure that when you create the reading exercise, you include these types of tasks, okay? Multiple choice, identify to what or whom the words refer, true statements, true or false, match vocabulary, gut feeling, match headings with paragraphs, match questions with answers in the text, match statements with people, short answer questions. Those are one of the most difficult. I included a document in the Padlet that has to do with the typical paper 2 reading mistakes. And I don't know if you agree with this or not, but one of the most common mistakes is not using the words from the text. Students are used to paraphrasing their answers and making inferences. And for the most part, these questions, which probably we don't agree with, but they ask students to quote verbatim from the text. And that's where they lose points. Also, they lose points when they include more responses that they need to answer. The question says which word, and they include 2 words. They lose the marks for that question. Again, paraphrasing rather than using a short direct quote. In true or false questions, the justification has to be right and the true or false has to be right. And normally the best way of getting the justification right is quoting a short phrase from the text. They have poor scanning techniques or poor time management skills. Now, if you read the last subject report, it tells you as one of the tips, those are great. Like as soon as they get out in September, you make sure you read them because you get so many tips there. It says that you need to teach students to devote less time to text A, a little bit more time to text B, and much more time to text C, because they are in increasing level of difficulty. And I didn't know that. So I think that's a good piece of advice. So if you want to find out more about text types and how to tackle these problems, you can access this document in the Padlet. Now, when it comes to listening, this is the first time that we're doing listening. As I said, there are not many samples. There are only 2 past, well, not past papers, exemplars in the IB, specimen papers. So we have to create our own listening exercises. When we do that, again, be aware of the text, of the task types that they are going to be exposed to, which are those 6, okay? You can find that in the Program Resource Center for the IB. However, the most important part for the listening is not that, or what is the most difficult thing for students is not the task types. It's sometimes the variety of accents that they're exposed to. And again, we're talking about variety again, expose them to accents from all over the English-speaking world, but also the pauses that appear in the real exam. So here I created a document that is not in the Padlet, but I can put it in the Padlet. And if not, you take a picture now, because the times and the pauses are extremely long. And what I have found, and many teachers that I talk to have found, is that students get lost with waiting for such a long time. So you have instructions, then you have a 2-minute silence. Then before the text plays, or the first text plays, you have 4 minutes to read the whole somebody needs to mute their phone, their microphone. So those pauses, like you need to, I know it's too much time, but you need to practice this with students, because if not, they're going to be lost. They don't know what to do with so much time in their hands. A couple of resources for paper 2 that are also there. Common Lead for reading is great. You can get readings from themes. It's free. It's an NGO, so it's free. It talks to Google Classroom, so it's great. Newsletter, it has a free version and a paid version, also good. The Guardian and One Stop English, they have a series of news with different levels of difficulty, focused on vocabulary, expressions, formulaic language. It's also good. And then for listening, we have Play Pause It. I don't know if you have used it. I'll show you a screenshot later. NPR and ListenWise. ListenWise also has like a paid version and a free version. And the good thing about that is that you can create your own questions. So it's good for creating the types of questions that you have for paper 2. So this is what Play Pause It looks like. You pick a video from YouTube, and you can add questions at specific times in the video. And the students cannot keep on watching unless they answer the questions. So you decide what to focus on. It can be building background knowledge. It can be setting the schema. It can be a vocabulary question. It can be that you want them to make connections with other things. So this talks to Google Classroom, and you can get to see how many times they watched it, what the responses they gave, etc., etc., etc. So it's pretty useful. And then I included other resources and ideas that you can use that are related to the themes that you can use with the listening. Sometimes when I expose them to listenings that are like heavy on vocabulary for the themes, I have them do other things apart from the listening task. Then I have them take down notes. They have to get used to taking down notes at a fast speed. So they take down notes, they get into groups, and they have to make a visual representation of what they have heard. And you can see here with the hidden cost of hamburgers, different groups, different mind maps or visual representations of that. And I remember we did this in December. And when we did the oral in March, many of these students were quoting ideas, phrases, and expressions from this video and this piece of work that they have done. Look at up there, which says, what we don't pay for at the counter, we end up paying in other ways. Well, I've heard this phrase so many times in that oral, but that's also good. So not just use the listening for the listening tasks on paper 2 per se, use them also to build that background knowledge and to give them ideas that they can then use in the oral. Okay. I'm going to skip this for paper 2, and I'm going to let you complete your ideas for paper 2, listening and reading, when we go to the oral activity, okay? So let's go to internal assessment. That is probably the one, especially HL, the one that we need more guidance on. In internal assessment, it is divided between SL and HL. SL, internal assessment, is very similar to what we've been doing for the past 15 years or more in Language B. 15-minute prep, visual stimulus. But the literary extract, it's causing a lot of anxiety to teachers and also students. So that's what we are going to focus more on. But let's focus on the assessment objectives for standard level first. With the individual oral, as you said in the first activity, we tackle every single assessment objective, all of them, except for written text in assessment objective 5. So bear that in mind when we are designing learning experiences. And now, again, like if you read the subject report, there is something that appears every year or for the last 2 years, and because it's a difference with the previous individual oral before this new guide. The visual stimulus that you choose shouldn't have captions, which it had in the past. You need to indicate a theme. It can be a photo, a comic, an illustration, or an ad, and it can have words. It can include words. It can be a poster. In the past, that was not the case. But we need to bear in mind when we are picking these pictures, we need to pick pictures or visuals that are going to help our students talk about it and talk through it. So it needs to enable a detailed description so that they start describing what they see. And that's going to bring their anxiety levels down. But then it needs to give them opportunities to focus on intercultural understanding. And this is probably number 3, the most important part and what everybody is failing to do. It has to be relevant to the target culture. During the first part, the visual stimulus should be clearly relevant to an aspect of the target culture, and students need to make that connection and not just say, this picture might have been taken in the United States. No, talk about the cultural aspects of the target language. It should also let students make personal interpretations and express a personal opinion. They need to lead to further discussion, because then you will have to talk for at least 12 minutes about that. And the second and third part are conversations about the picture, well, and about other themes, part 3, but part 2, it's going to be you continue talking about that theme that was on that picture. And then it is good if that picture can link to more than one theme, because then students can make those connections and it's easier for them to talk about that. So I want you to have a look at these 2 pictures. They were taken from Pixabay. You can get tons of free images there, but there are tons of resources now where you can get free pictures or Creative Commons pictures. So we have these 2 visual stimuli, and I want you to use the chat to tell me which is good and why, and which themes can you associate with them, or with the one that you think is good. Let's take 1 minute. Sarah is going to watch the chat for me.
Sure. So I'll be reading out the responses from the chat box.
Let's call the first one number 1, and the one with the girls number 2.
Okay, so there's consensus that number 2 is the better picture of the 2 options.
Okay.
The second one is good as it refers to social organization and relationships. Number 2 is good. The second one, number 2, is much better as it gives the students more scope to talk about all aspects of technology. links to human ingenuity and identities. Visual number 2, students can speak about identity, experience, relationships, links to human ingenuity, social organization, technology and experience.
Okay, so we have more or less, yeah, thank you,
target,
Sarah.
Yeah,
yes, yeah,
sure.
We
so
have
one more
tell me.
Point. Picture 2 is very good visual stimulus as it contains lots of information for a student to discuss and to make link to target culture.
Okay,
right?
That person that wrote that, can you specify how we can link it to the target culture? How can we link picture 2 to the target culture?
Mm-hmm. Easier to describe. It has a lot to talk about. No, we haven't.
No, they're not answering that. Okay, I thought this is tricky, and this was a tricky exercise on my part, because I think it's good for all the reasons that you gave, and we can link it to different themes: social organization, identities, experiences, human ingenuity. But I think it's difficult for a student to find a connection with the target culture. This picture can be used by a teacher of French B, Spanish B, English B, whatever. Like, can I really associate it with a culture in particular? Can I really talk about the cultural aspects of the target language in particular? So I think that that's where it fails, and that's where it is difficult for students to make that connection that the IB is looking for. So look at this one. Maybe there is not so much to describe as in the previous one, but we can definitely tie this to the target culture. Which culture are you tying this to? You can use the chat.
So they're indicating the US mainly. The US target culture is the US American culture.
Yeah, so here, this is easier for students. This one here, I mean, it's an English speaking culture. Can we tie it specifically to the US? No, it could be the US, it could be Australia, it could be New Zealand, it could be many places. Well, maybe it could be the US because of the Statue of Liberty. That's, but maybe some students cannot make that connection. So you need to train your SL students to find these connections with the target culture, because in the past 4 sessions, exam sessions, students have lost too many points because of that. It is not so clear in HL that you have to make that connection, but you have to make an explicit connection in SL, individual oral activity. So bear that part in mind. I guess like you have no problem getting images that are that share themes across them, or that have a lot of description to make the student feel at ease. But bear this point in mind. This is the one piece of advice that I can give you to take with you after this, okay? So when it comes to language B internal assessment for SL, and here I'm again making emphasis on the target culture, we have 3 different parts. In the past, we had 2 parts. In part 1, the student presents for 3 to 4 minutes. They describe the picture, they relate it to the theme. You give them the theme. Remember to write that theme in the picture and relate it to the target culture. In part 2, we start with a conversation, and you start asking follow-up questions on the presentations, on the themes, on the target culture, and make sure you don't ask a list of questions, but you just follow up from what students have been saying. Remember that we have to make them feel at ease, and it has to be natural. And in part 3, we need to discuss, again, for 4 to 5 minutes, a general discussion of at least 1 additional theme. And again, here, focus on the conversation. Don't focus on, asking questions as if it was an exam. The preparation time for SL, remember, it's 15 minutes, supervised. and the notes have to be minimal. They cannot be reading from a piece of paper. So that's another thing that you have to practice, taking down notes and then talking from those notes. Okay. Further clarification for part one of SL. This is like a timeline that you can give students. So they introduce the picture of the situation, the background, the foreground, give them language to talk about that, work on that descriptive language. Then they make interpretations or assumptions, connecting it to the theme and connecting it to the target culture. So this could be, or this is related to this culture because we read that this and that happened, or we read about this and that problem, okay? And that's how they connect it to the personal experience. And it is also good to make connections to their own culture and to make, to contrast what they see in the target culture with their own culture. If they do that, they will get so many points for criterion A and B1, okay? So this is more or less how it should be working, but I cannot stress enough the target culture part, all right? Now, if you go to HL, again, we're moving to HL and here's where you are going to get to work. We touch upon every single assessment objective. It is focused on a literary extract and it has 20-minute preparation time, supervised. Do not let them write paragraphs because sometimes you might have to submit that to the IB. They want to see bullet points or a mind map or ideas. It is very important to teach them how to mark the literary extract. And I'm going to give you examples about that and what is it that you can do. But probably the most important thing here is to choosing a good literary text and a good literary extract. We can choose any type of literary work. And I know that we love languages and that's why we teach language. And we are crazy about traditional authors, but our students are not. And the objective of this exercise, as we read at the beginning, and as you pointed out, is communication, is cultural understanding, is international mindedness, is making connections. So we need to find literary works that are going to be able, that they will be able to connect to themes. They will be able to connect to the things that we discussed in class, to the text that we have exposed them to. And when I say text, I say oral, written, visual, all types of texts, okay? So bear that in mind when you choose a literary work. Bear your students in mind and what you have been doing in class. Make them part of the choice of a text too. So the extract, 300 words or 30 lines, not less, not more. And the work that you choose has to be originally written in the target language. Now, when we go to the extract, when you choose the extract, it has to be easy to find. Like you have to present students with 2 extracts and they pick one. They need to know it, I mean, just by seeing it, if it is from the beginning of the book, middle of the book, what happens before, what happens after. Don't give extracts when that you put there to go and get the students. Make sure that you use extracts that have sparked a lot of debate in class, that you saw the students were eager to talk about. Pick those extracts. Sometimes what I do, it's like when we are reading, I read, I don't know, the first 10 chapters. I tell them, find 5 extracts that are really, really important up to where we have read. And then we photocopy those extracts and we start working with those. They are good at spotting that. And they can tell you why the extract is important. So then half the work is done. So as I said before, the extract needs to give me opportunities to focus on intercultural understanding, because one point in the assessment is that they talk about the cultural aspects of the extract. It has to be originally written in the target language. It has to let students offer personal interpretations and making inferences about what's going on. It has to allow them to engage in conversation in part 2. And again, in the same with the pictures, you talk through the extract. You're not going to spend time describing what's going on there, and easily linked to themes. So I'm going to share a book that I have read with my students in the last 2 years. The book, as you can see here, is for young teenagers. It's aimed at ages 10 to 14. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because, I mean, it's easy to read and it touches upon so many topics. So let's see. It says 14-year-old Ahmed is stranded in a city that wants nothing to do with him. Newly arrived in Brussels, Belgium, Ahmed had fled a life of uncertainty and suffering in Syria, only to lose his father on the perilous journey to the shores of Europe. Now Ahmed's struggling to get by on his own and with no one left to trust and nowhere to go. He's starting to lose hope. Then he meets Max, a 13-year-old American boy, their target culture. Lonely and homesick, Max is struggling at his new school and just can't seem to do anything right. But with one startling discovery, Max's and Ahmed's life collide and a friendship begins to grow. Together, Max and Ahmed will defy the odds, learning from each other what it means to be brave and how hope can change your destiny. So here we talk, this book can be linked to experiences. It can be linked to identities. We have Ahmed talking about Syria, the refugee crisis, the Syrian war. We have Max moving into Brussels from America, comparing America to Brussels, having to learn a second language. He knows nothing of French. He doesn't understand Europeans. Sharing the planet, social organization, because we see what happens to these refugees that come to Europe. How is it that they think, what they feel. So this is great for point of view, developing point of views, and comparing cultures for intercultural understanding. It has been an amazing experience so far. So how do we use this book? Oh, before that, the structure for the individual oral, we said that we had 20-minute preparation time. We have part 1, part 2, and part 3. In part 1, this is what we asked them to do, and I'm going to share a resource for you to use, but we asked them to summarize the extract and relate it to the literary text, highlight the importance of the extract. Is it because of characters, events, plot, conflict, themes? And then to end that part 1 with a conclusion on the significance of the extract. That helps them organize their presentation correctly. In part 2, we discuss the subject matter more in depth, but again, focus on authentic conversation. And I'm going to share what we do in order to be able to follow up from part 1. And then in part 3, we go to discussion on the themes, and here comes the target culture. So you are going to bring in themes that have not been discussed in part 1 and part 2. And in this part, you know your students. So refer to articles, videos, audios, refers to all of those things that you have dealt with in class. You know your students, you know which questions to ask in order to make them feel at ease, okay? So this document that is shared with you in the Padlet as well, it's like a scaffolding document that we give students when we give extracts, right? So we decide on different extracts, we give them to students. So summarize what the extract is about. I have it, it is more clear. This is what it looks like for students, but here, oops, sorry. But here is the summary of what we have there. So briefly describe what the book is about and where in the book falls the extract or the extract falls. The importance, why it is important. Make sure you refer to the line in the text to point to examples and details. Provide a thorough explanation of your choices. So this extract is important from the point of view of character development, because we can see how Max has changed ever since he met Ahmed, etc., etc., etc. And then they, for example, in line 20, we can see this. He says that. This makes me see that. Okay. And then when they make the personal connection, again, this makes me feel, I can relate this to, while reading it, I felt, if I were in this situation, I could. You give them these sentence starters, and then the more you practice, the more they get incorporated in their long-term memory, okay? So, of course, when it says importance, you will have to develop and talk about those with your students. Okay, themes, literary themes. You will need to talk about the different literary themes. You will need to talk about what's conflict, man versus man, man versus society. You will need to teach them how to mark the extract. Okay, so this is one of the class activities that we do when I said that you need to teach students mark the extract. We print the extracts that we decide are important in an A3 paper. We paste that paper in a bigger paper on all of the walls of the classroom, and then we divide them in groups, and they have to mark the extract and highlight all the things that they find. So they have to say why it is important, the themes that they associate with. For example, here we have, they highlighted something here and they say invisibility. Invisibility is now a problem. They were trying to cross the Asian Sea. They didn't want to be spotted as they were in Turkish coast, and they would be deported. On the other hand, once they reached the Greek coast, they wanted to be rescued by the Coast Guard, so they wanted to be spotted. So all these questions and all these findings that students write about, what we do, it's like then they rotate and then they go to other extracts and then respond. That's why it's called talk. They respond to what other students have written. They add more things or they ask questions. And then we end up with 5, 6, 10 really exploited extracts with tons of ideas and learning from one another. So when they get the extract and they have to present, and we do mock IAs or whatever, they have so many things to talk about. And of course, they're not going to talk about all of that, but they feel that they have the tools to face this type of assessment, okay? So we have more examples here. Why the extract is important, character development, plot conflict. As a reader, you understand Max, living through the ordeal with Ahmed, etc. Okay? Connections, they also add connections. So they write how they connect these extracts with things that we have seen in class. So here they wrote Chimamanda Adichie. She's a Nigerian author, and she has a TED talk that is called The Danger of a Single Story. We use that for everything. That always comes up in the orals. They always talk about that. She talks about stereotypes, that stereotypes are not wrong, but they are incomplete. So it's always good to talk, to connect with any of the themes that are connected to the extract. So then if they are able to do this, it is much easier to face the daunting task of facing the IA. Okay. Another thing we do is we create PowerPoint presentations, including questions and possible questions relating to the different themes. So not only do we, the teachers, add questions there, but also students add questions there. So then once we have those questions, we can do different things. Visual thinking. So they get in groups and they try to answer their questions with notes and visual thinking. There you see people working in groups, adding ideas, they talk to one another. Oh, do you remember when we talked about this in class or when we talked about that? And they add those questions. That doesn't mean that I'm going to be asking those questions in the oral, but they're going to be very similar if I have like a bag of questions for every theme. Okay, they can do flashcards with questions. We can do a bingo and they have to answer the questions. They can do a competition and see who answers the best questions with more information, because the idea is for them to extend their questions and to extend their opinions. Okay, so before we move on, we're going to move on and then we are going to come up to the Padlet, because I really do want you to share your strategies, but I also want you to have the opportunity to do moderation with the group, okay? So then we're going to go to the Padlet and you will have an opportunity to share what you do in class that can help us all have a better course design for these assessments, okay? So this is what we are going to do right now. You're going to be divided into groups. In each group, you're going to choose one member who's going to be the person that will share what you agree on, okay? So that's the first thing that you have to do. Choose one member who's going to be the sharer. You're going to read the extract that Sarah is going to share in the chat. So Sarah, if you can start sharing these links so that they have them. before they go to the breakout rooms. You're going to read the extract. Then you're going to listen to the audio. That's a real audio. That's a real exam. It's not by the IB. This is an exam by my school. We did it during lockdown. So you will find probably that it's not so easy to listen to the teacher's questions, but you can listen to the student very well. So you listen to the audio. Sarah is going to share that link to the audio. You're going to assess student performance. You're using the HL rubric. Okay, this is a typical moderation exercise. You can do this with students, you can do this with teachers, with your teachers. And you are going to assign the marks for each criterion. Okay, you're going to go back to your group. So let's say you will have 16, 17 minutes to do that. And then you're going to go back to your group and discuss and agree on a band for each criterion. And you're going to enter the marks on a poll that we are going to share with you when we go back to the main room, okay? So we're going to ask you to go back and you will share your agreement in the poll. And let's see how that varied from teacher to teacher, and then from what we gave the student and what the student got in the real examination after moderation, okay? Are we ready? Are the links there?
Yes, the links are in the chat box.
Cool. If you cannot find the links in the chat box, you can find them in the Padlet, okay? All right. So I think that I can go to a breakout room now. I've been invited to room 1. Shall I join that one?
Yes, and then you can navigate between the different rooms.
Okay, cool. Okay. Oh, let's see if I'm sharing. So, am I sharing my screen? No, not yet. Let's see. Let's go back to it. Okay. So let's see. I know that many of you might not have had the time to listen through it all, but it was just to get an idea. And this was, again, tricky. So I would like, if you chose one person, even if you didn't have time to discuss, to please complete one person per group, complete the poll that Toddle is going to share, the Toddle team is going to share now, to see how many marks you would give this student for each criterion. Like where, in which band would you put them? 1 through 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 9, for A, for B1, B2, and C. Let's see if I have time to go through. Are we done? If I hit end poll, will I get the final results, or are these the final results? Oh, there we go. All right, so here we have the final results. 10, 10, 12, 7, 9, more 10, 12 than 7, 9, 7, 9, whoops, in criterion B1, 7, 9, in criterion B2, 4, 6, 7, 9, 10, 12. Okay, it's mixed. You're going to be surprised. All right. It would be good to have time to discuss why, but I don't have that time. But I'm happy to answer questions if you put questions in the Padlet. I'm going to stay later and go through that Padlet, okay? Because I know you had questions. I will be answering all of those there, okay? So let me show you. Let me show you what this student got, and you will be surprised. He got 11 points for language A, for criterion A language, 6 points for B1, 6 points for B2, and 6 points for interactive skills. Probably you didn't get to that part. Probably you haven't heard that. And let me tell you why, because I'm sure that you have tons of valid reasons why you gave 7, 9. But look at the teacher feedback. It's huge. And this is what you should aim at. You have access to these in the Padlet too, okay? But if you give examples of what the student has done in the oral, and you give concrete examples of how the student is meeting or is reaching that criterion or that mark band, nobody's going to change that. I mean, of course, it has to be real, right? But this student was making mistakes, yes, but never does it say in the guide that the students cannot make mistakes, okay? So find the best descriptor that best describes the student's performance most accurately, and you use the best fit approach. We always go to what the student has not done, and this is a totally different approach. What is there, okay? It has to be balanced, it has to be fair, it has to reflect what the student has done. It is not necessary for every single aspect of a level to be met in order to be in that mark band. And when there are 2 marks available within a level, you provide the highest one. If the student works, demonstrate that that one is there, okay? And it doesn't have to be the effortless performance, okay? This is another thing that I wanted to share with you, that I don't know if you noticed, but the questions that were being asked by the teacher, this is the preparation of the extract by the teacher. Of course, you don't give this to a student, but when the student is preparing a mark in the extract, you are marking the extract too. In those 20 minutes, thinking about your individual students and what things from that extract you can discuss with them. What questions can you ask? Here at the bottom, what things what questions can you ask about the text, what questions you can ask about the themes, okay? Read the extract carefully, spot subtleties, associate the extract with different English B themes, come up with questions you could ask in part 2 and part 3, and that will make the whole presentation much more natural. It doesn't have to be perfect to be awarded the top grades if the student meets the requirement of the criterion, okay? When it comes to moderation, you can do it in many different ways. What I have just done with you, you can do with your teachers. Moderation can be done by self-assessment, and I showed you a document for that. Peer assessment, and I gave you tools for that. Then the teacher assesses the student work and always share the feedback with students and ask them to reflect. Then in the department, you can share, you can do this that we have just done. Another teacher assesses the student work, give them feedback, and then you have a discussion on which is the best or the best fit approach to that student. Because we know our students very well, and sometimes we are not fair. That's why moderation is necessary. Okay, here you have the reflection document. For peer assessment, this is another strategy that we use. Mentimeter, it's an online tool, so you can do polls for students, what we have just done with you, and they have to think about the rubric. You make them use the rubric, so you have them listen to an extract or listen to a student, and then they have to grade it. Where is it in terms of command of language? Where is it in terms of relevant ideas? And then give me feedback, explain what the candidate did well, give me areas for improvement. Just make students an active part of the assessment. This is the anonymous, they don't know who wrote that, but look at the feedback that students are given. Good ideas and connections, your point gets across to the listener, but it could be better if the ideas run more smoothly, maybe with a better set structure or more connectors. These are students giving this feedback. This means that they really know the rubric, and I'm really running out of time. So I'm going to stress and end up with the IE feedback that she sent to the IB. Use specific vocabulary of the rubric. Use examples of what is there. Use the best fit approach. Provide examples from the actual presentation of the student or the conversations to illustrate your report. Be as specific as possible. I know, like, if you have 30 students, this is painstaking, but we really want our students to do well. And this really, really help them, okay? And remember, please do not include the name of the student, the teacher, or the school in any of the extracts that you submit, okay? Without further ado, I will be going through the burning issues that you had there. The idea was to have time to discuss them, but we had only 90 minutes and it was impossible. I will look through that, and please keep the other Padlet, save it, because and share all of the resources that you have with us. The green one, let's see if I can get back to it, but there was a green, this one. Please go in there and just at the bottom, add all of the resources that you have. This can be our working document to really have a strong English B course, okay? So this is all, sorry, on my side. Thank you so much for being there. It was my pleasure, and I'm sorry for talking so much.
Thank you, Mariana, once again for your wonderful session today. I'm sure everyone who joined in is taking away very useful insights. If, for our audience, if you're interested in knowing more about how you can use Toddle at your school, we're doing a quick walkthrough to show you the DP unit planning module today at 10:45 GMT. Do drop into that session using the link in the chat box. Alternatively, you can book a demo using the link in the chat box at your own convenience. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe and see you at our next event. Bye.